These are my final days with the Canon RF 70-200mm 2.8L lens. This is what it looks like. It's an incredible lens, but you already know that. Really is a phenomenal lens though, truly. But it better be. It costs a fortune. Let's go shoot with it, let's talk about it, review it, maybe, kinda. More just take it for a spin, enjoy it, and lament the fact that I'm going to have to sell the thing. I mean, unless I decide to sell something else instead. I'm honestly running out of things to sell though. Turns out being broke kinda sucks. Who knew? And it's really gonna hurt to lose this lens. I've enjoyed my time with it immensely. The images it produces are sharp, perfect, crisp color, contrast, clarity. Makes me feel like a better photographer than I actually probably am. I don't use this lens as often as I should. I regret that now. I thought we'd have decades of work ahead of us, the lens and I, so I didn't feel a sense of urgency. But when I do spend some time with it, I often end up feeling like it's the best work I've done in quite some time. But a lens, no matter how spectacular, is still a thing, and things just aren't that important. It's brought me joy, but today that joy is tinged with the reality that I can't keep it. Each frame is being captured on borrowed time, but I'm just going to use it as much as I possibly can, make my remaining time with it count to the best of my abilities. So this lens has been my companion now for a brief amount of time, about a year. But in that time we've been on many hikes together, drives, peaceful mornings, anxiety-filled frantic afternoons. Time well spent though. Productive days. It'll be okay. And on the review side of things, I'll say a year is more than enough time to know that I adore this lens. There's literally nothing I would change about it. It's basically perfect. If you have the means and you're considering this lens, do it. Don't hesitate, it's remarkable. But yeah, we don't go back ages. I don't have like endless history with this lens. With similar lenses, yes, but I don't know if that makes this hurt less or more. I still think of it as my new lens. But I had the EF 70-200 2.8L version of this lens too. One of them anyway. No idea which one specifically, offhand. Or yeah, I do. It was actually the one that was also really freaking expensive. Funny, I had to sell it also for a similar reason. Not exactly the same reason. This time it's medical bills and costs associated with caring for parents, but last time it was just due to being poor and my wife hadn't seen her parents in a year, so the sale of the lens funded that trip. I really appreciate that this lens was designed to collapse down to such a compact state for transport, though I'll freely admit that just straight up looks silly. But who gives a shit what it looks like? It was designed for usefulness, not physical attractiveness, which I appreciate so much, honestly. But when I sold that EF lens, the 70-200, I replaced it with a much cheaper 200mm prime that I bought used. And so maybe I'll do something similar this time. Just look for a cheaper alternative. But I'll be okay. Who knows, if the wife and I can ever turn this situation around, maybe I'll own it again. Either way, it'll be fine. If you're getting the vibe that I'm maybe trying to convince myself that I won't miss it, you would be correct. I will miss it. It stings, but life is hard. I'll be okay. It's only a problem because I'm so spoiled. I probably shouldn't have ever had this lens in the first place. I'll just think of it as a very extended rental. It's very cool though, approaching nature photography with a telephoto lens. Scanning a busy landscape, isolating these little pockets that you find interesting, separating them from the clutter, extracting them, creating boundaries where none exist. And you have to train your eye over time to do that. Pull these little vignettes out of the chaos, give them meaning, even if only to yourself. And that's also the gift of a telephoto lens, but of course you can do the same thing naturally with a much cheaper telephoto lens. Seriously, my purchase of this lens is a direct result of my having been spoiled, I think. Having been a working photographer for so long, with astonishing gear coming and going, much of which I didn't own directly. Some of it I did, but maybe it belonged to the studio I worked for, or maybe I was the owner of the studio. Owner, in quotation marks, co-owner actually. So when the business closed down, stuff was split up, sold. So my thinking is not exactly aligned with my current situation. Because I'm like, oh, I need a telephoto lens, and I didn't even look at cheap lenses. I didn't consider the possibility of adapting an older lens. I just jumped right to top of the line, modern. It made sense to me at the time. But even if I could afford it now, a year later, I'm not the same person. I might make a different choice just based on that alone. Because modern pro camera gear has improved to the point where I've just lost interest. I no longer find it interesting. Everything's perfect now. The latest wave of Canon cameras where you register faces with the autofocus and it prioritizes the registered faces. I can't think of anything more gross than that, personally. Now your camera's giving out homework assignments. The roles have finally flipped. It's not the tool anymore. But I don't mean to criticize if you use that. And that's not the point. That someone buys or uses it is not remotely my concern. I just received this new power bank because increasingly I deal with equipment without interchangeable batteries. This can charge 3 things at once. And fast, and it's tiny. The model is P63 Cougar. The brand is INIU. But I'm also still using my Llano charger to charge my camera batteries. It stays in the car now. It's a little bulky to carry around in my small bag. But ever since I switched from a GoPro with its lovely interchangeable battery arrangement to a Pocket 3 with its non-interchangeable battery situation, I have to carry around a power bank with me basically 100% of the time. And I did accept this INIU power bank for free. Hopefully that doesn't ruin my credibility on the matter, but I turn down far more of these types of offers than I accept. But I needed a power bank. Anyway, it took about 7 minutes to recharge my DJI camera from 58% back to 100%, while simultaneously charging 2 other things, so I'm pretty pleased with it. Getting back to what I was talking about before, AI autofocus. So what bothers me is that this is where we are now. We're just at a really unfortunate and bland moment in history. That is to say, cameras are becoming as tiresome and boring as the culture that's creating them, and as soulless as the algorithms that are controlling them. Maybe I'm crazy, but getting the correct person's face in focus kind of seems like we've had that one licked for a while, no? When I bought this lens, I'd been shooting film for years. I was starting to get into the idea of shooting classic DSLRs again. And so it's not as though I was obsessed with having the latest gear, by any means. But I thought that there should be a clear demarcation between my professional tools and my just-for-fun tools. And also, I was tired of adapting EF lenses to mirrorless. Oh, and that's right, I did actually end up using that EF 200mm prime for weddings and portraits for a bit. Anyway, a good 70-200 was always an essential tool to me in the past, so I didn't want to cheap out on it. I didn't feel that I needed to. Financially, things have just continued to deteriorate since parents started dropping dead and stuff. Brain cancer, strokes, dementia. But doing things as cheaply as possible honestly has always been part of my DNA as a photographer. But now just even more so. I've really been discovering of late, as a philosophy, as a life choice, that I actually prefer working with older gear with imperfections, character. Shiny and new has really lost its appeal to me. So this is sad. I, of course, even having said all that, would really like to keep this lens. And yet, adapting something more unusual to my R5 here, that sounds potentially more interesting. And outside of just a philosophical gear preference, more and more and more, I'm also bored with pristine, clean images. I'm bored with tools that make the job easy. I shoot JPEG mostly because I don't want to tinker. Yes, there's a laziness component to that, but It's mostly about purity. I either got the shot or I didn't, and if I didn't, it's a lesson. And on the hardware side of things, I'm interested in doing something more custom, more hacked together, hands-on. Spending some time recently shooting pinhole photography really solidified this for me. So, mixed feelings, no doubt. I do kind of suspect, as sad as this might be, it's also kind of for the best. Forces me to go in the direction I'm already headed anyway, but maybe this way I'll get there a little faster. Old cameras, old lenses, they've got stories, history, scars. You can feel it when you use them. This continuation, this continuity is comforting. You're stepping into a conversation that's been ongoing before you. Hopefully it'll continue long after you're gone. The stuff straight from a conveyor belt at some factory. It'll get there in time, but why should I have to be the babysitter? I don't want to start with a blank slate. Raise a child, so to speak. Still, there's something undeniably special about the RF 70 to 200 millimeter 2.8L. It's just extremely dialed in, so that it almost disappears when you're using it. And seamlessness has its place. I think that's really valuable in certain situations, but yeah, it's just not what I'm looking for these days. It'd be nice to have both, but I can't. But it definitely doesn't mean you're a sellout or something if you want or need expensive stuff. That's perfectly fine. And once again, my God, buy this lens. It's astonishing if you can afford it and you need it. But it's very likely this lens will not be the only piece of gear that I have to sell. Some other lenses may have to go, but I'd really like to keep the R5. It's such a great platform for adapting vintage lenses. So let's get started. I have a few vintage lenses, my mom's old lenses. Here's a 70 to 200 that belonged to my mom for her Olympus camera. Let's just do a side-by-side comparison. Looks really similar. And zooming in, yeah, it's definitely not as sharp as you would expect, but honestly, it compares a lot more favorably than I would have imagined. I'm getting this really interesting light leak in the bottom right corner with my mom's lens. Wonder if that has to do with the adapter. Whatever it has to do with, though, I love it. That's exactly the kind of cool shit that just creeps in when you're working with older gear. Unexpected stuff. It's great. But it's true even with a lens like this, with all its precision and polish. The success of an image is never guaranteed. Even with the best tools, there's no shortcut. And there's no replacement for vision. That is, having an idea and carrying out the actions necessary to accomplish that idea. Vision. The opposite of existing as a blank void and just pointing a thing around. But it's not about rejecting new things. I reject nothing. I just have my preferences. A direction which excites me, and another which doesn't. There's a freedom to be found in risk, the risk associated with so-called lesser equipment. These days, that's where I want to exist. I've had my eye on a particular line of camera for ages, a current expensive model, and now I'm just grateful for not having gone into more debt to get it. Could have been cool, but the moment has passed. My interest grew rapidly in this other direction. But what I've really begun to find distasteful personally about buying expensive gear. This lens is a prime example. It's like I'm paying for the right to do good work. Like I'm gaining cosmic permission and acceptance. Like credibility is being bestowed upon the images I'm producing because I've joined some elitist club, paid my dues, acquired the appropriate permits. That mindset just feels wrong, feels subservient, feels incredibly out of sync with the concerns of an artist.